We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph in Maseches Avodah Zarah. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 52a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a brisa with a machlokas between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva in terms of avodas kochavim, in terms of idols when they become asura, when they become prohibited. And the Gemara now is dealing with Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. Rabbi Yishmael's opinion is that the avodas kochavim of an ovid kochavim is only asur, it's only forbidden when it is worshipped. But if it belongs to a Yisrael, if it belongs to a Jewish person, then it's asur miyad. And the Gemara said in the previous Amud that Rabbi Yishmael learned this from the pasuk of Abeid to Abdun, which we'll see in a moment. But the point over here is that even though the pasuk seems to be talking about Mekomos, the locations of the Avodah Zarah, but we already said earlier that Mekomos do not have a status of being asur because we say the gods are on the mountains, but the mountains are not considered to be the gods. And so therefore, if it's not talking about Mekomos, Tineu Inyan L'Kelim, so then we should apply it. Instead, it's talking about the vessels that are used for Avodah Zarah. And Mikan Amru, from here they say, Avodas Kochavim Shalovet Kochavim Eino Asura Ela Ad Sheteyaved, that if you have an Avodah Zarah that belongs to an idol worshiper, it's only prohibited when it's actually worshipped. V'shel Yisrael Miyad, but if it belongs to a Jew, then it is prohibited right away. And the Gemara asks, "V'habikelim ukimna la." But didn't we just say that the pasuk is talking about vessels? That's what we just said at the top of the Amud. Tineu inyan l'kelim, and now all of a sudden we're saying that it's talking about actual avodah zarah. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "Asher atem yorshim osam es Elohayim." It says you're inheriting them their gods, makish Elohayim l'kelim, and so therefore we're comparing their gods to the kelim. The idea over here is really that the Elohayim is compared to the Mekomos, the places that you are inheriting. But again, we said the Mekomos really is referring to kelim, and so therefore we're comparing the idols to the kelim. Ma kelim ad sheyavdu, just like by the kelim, it's until they're worshipped. Af Elohayim nami ad sheyavdu. That applies also to the idols themselves. They only become prohibited when they are worshipped. And before we take a look at Rashi, we'll take a look at the full pasuk again. Abeid ha'avdun es kol ha'mekomos asher avdu sham hagoyim. It's talking about destroying the places where the nations serve the idols. Asher atem yarshim osam es Elohayim. And then it talks about again the idols al hahorim haramim, on the mountains. And again we say that the harim are not considered to be Elohayim, and so therefore it cannot be that we're talking about the places. It must be that we're talking about the kelim. And again, the Gemara then said, once that's true, so then we compare Elohayim to the Kelim, and just like by the Kelim it's Ad Sheyavdu, so too by Elohayim it's Ad Sheyavdu. And Rashi explains, Makish Elos L'Mekomos Du Ukminan B'Kelim. Again, the idols are compared to the places, but the places we're understanding refers to Kelim. And Ma Kelim Ad Sheyavdu, just like by the vessels, it's until they serve. T'chsiv, as it's written, Asher Avdu Sham. The pasuk actually says the words Asher Avdu Sham, and again, Asher Avdu Sham is referring to the places where they served, but we're replacing the word places with Kelim, with vessels. And the Gemara continues with Rabbi Akiva. Now, how does Rabbi Akiva respond to Rabbi Yishmael? The lo makish, he doesn't make this comparison, because Amar Loch, he'll say to you, es hifsika inyan. There's the word es in the pasuk, and that creates a separation. So even though it says again, Abeid ta'avdun es kol ha'mekomos asher avdu sham hagoyim, and then we wanted to compare it to Elohayim, but it says es Elohayim, and so therefore the es is like a hefsik, it's like an interruption, it separates, and therefore he doesn't make that same comparison as Rabbi Yishmael. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yishmael. Now, according to Rabbi Yishmael, Eshkechan avodas kochavim shel ovid kochavim, we find that an idol of an idol worshiper, de'ein asura ad sheteyaved. We have a source that it's not prohibited until it's actually worshipped. But the Yisrael da asura miyad minole, where does he know? Where does Rabbi Yishmael know that if it belongs to a Jew, it's prohibited immediately? And the Gemara says to that, Svarhu, it's logical. Mida ovid kochavim ad sheteyaved. If it belongs to an ovid kochavim and we say it's until it's worshipped, the Yisrael asura miyad, it makes sense to say that if it belongs to a Jew, it's prohibited immediately. But the Gemara says, Eimud di Yisrael klalu klalu. Well, why don't we say that if it belongs to a Jew, it doesn't become prohibited at all? The Gemara says to that, Hashta geniza, boy, we know that in the case of Yisrael, it requires geniza, it has to be buried. It's surei lo mitzri. You think it's not prohibited? Of course it's prohibited. But the Gemara continues, V'ema kedovid kochavim. Okay, so fine, let's say it's prohibited, but maybe it's prohibited just like if it belonged to an ovid kochavim, meaning it has to be worshipped. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Kra, no, the pasuk says, V'eschataschem asher asisem eso egel. It talks about the making of the egel, talking about the egel hazav, mishas asiya kamle b'chet. From the moment it's made, there is the sin. But the Gemara still asks, maybe that's just that the person is considered a sinner. It's surei lo mitzvah, but maybe the idol itself is not prohibited. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Orur ha'ish asher yasa pesel u'masecha. It says the person is cursed who makes the pesel u'masecha, he makes the idol. Mishas asiya kamle ba'or. He's going to be cursed from the moment it's made. But still the Gemara asks, Ema hani mili lemekam gavra ba'or. Maybe that's only that the person is cursed. It's surei lo mitzvah, who says that it's prohibited. Maybe it's not prohibited. And the Gemara says to that, To'avas Hashem ksiv, it's written that it's an abomination to Hashem, and therefore it certainly is prohibited. For Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva responds to that, Davar hamevi lidei to'eva. It's just something that brings to this abomination. And Rashi explains, Hashta geniza boy, it requires geniza, the avodah zarah. Di'alfinon lekamon mi v'sam b'seiser. We learned that out from the pasuk. It says v'sam b'seiser has to be placed b'seiser. That's an idea of geniza. Ve'ema kida ovid kochavim ad sheteyavin. Maybe we should say that if it belongs to a Jew, it's the same as if it belongs to a non-Jew, that it's only prohibited when it's actually worshipped. And then the Gemara said for Rabbi Akiva, now how does Rabbi Akiva respond to Rabbi Yishmael from To'eva? Di'amar b'shal Yisrael ad sheteyavin, because again he says that if it belongs to a Jew, it has to be worshipped. So Hai To'avas Hashem, this pasuk of To'avas Hashem, lav de mitzar mishas asiyas, it doesn't mean it's prohibited from the moment it's made. Elahachikam, rather it just means as follows. Orur mishas asiyah, he is cursed from the time of making it. The asiyah meviyoso lidei to'eva, because the making it is going to bring the person to the abomination, sha'ovda, that he will worship it. And the Gemara continues for Rabbi Akiva. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva, avodas kochavim shel ovid kochavim. If you have an avodah zarah that belongs to an ovid kochavim, belongs to an idolater, the asura miyad, that it is forbidden right away, minole, from where do we know that? And the Gemara says, Amar Ula says, Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, Pesilei Elohayim tisrafun ba'esh. You have to burn their idols in fire, and we understand that to mean Mishapsolo Nasa Elo. From the moment that it's carved, it becomes a god. It has the status of an idol. And the Gemara continues, V'idach, and the other Tana, Rabbi Yishmael, Hahumi boile l'chidetani Rav Yosef. He uses that pasuk of Psilei Elohim Tisrafun Bo'esh for the teaching of Rav Yosef, the Tani Rav Yosef, because Rav Yosef taught, Minayin lo ovid kochavim sheposa laloa. How do we know that an ovid kochavim is able to be mevatel, can nullify his idol? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Psilei Elohim Tisrafun Bo'esh. Again, the same pasuk as quoted above. V'idach, in the other Tana, meaning Rabbi Akiva, nafkalei mida Shmuel. He learns out the idea of bittul from Shmuel. To Shmuel Rami, because Shmuel said the following contradiction in Psukim. Ksiv, it's written in the pasuk, lo sachmod kesev v'zav aleim. You can't covet the silver and gold upon them, talking about idols. Uchsib, but it's also written, v'lakachta lach, you take it for yourself. So are you allowed to take it or not? And so the Gemara says, "Haketzad, how so? Pislo leloa lo sachmod." When he carves it as an idol, so you can't covet, you can't take. But psalo melo, but once he's mevatel it, v'lakachta lach, then you could take it for yourself. And the Gemara continues for Rabbi Akiva. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva, Eshkechan avodas kochavim shel ovid kochavim da'asura miyad. We find that an avodah zarah that belongs to a non-Jew is forbidden right away. The Yisrael ad sheteyavin minol. How do we know that the avodah zarah of a Jew is only forbidden when it's actually worshipped? Amar Rav Yehuda says, Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, V'sam b'seiser, it's placed in private, and we understand that to mean ad sheyase lo dvarim sheb'seiser, until things are done, private matters are done, meaning to say, when it's actually worshipped, so then we say that it's going to be forbidden. V'idach, and the other Tana, meaning Rabbi Yishmael, Ahumi boy leilechad Rabbi Yitzchak, that pasuk is needed for what Rabbi Yitzchak taught. The Yamar Rabbi Yitzchak, because Rabbi Yitzchak says, Minayin la'avodas kocham shel Yisrael shatun geniza. From where do we know that the avodah zarah that belongs to a Jew needs geniza, needs to be buried? Shenamar, as it says in the pasuk, v'sam baseiser, again it's placed away privately, meaning to say geniza. V'idach, and the other Tana, nafkalei mid Rav Chisda, he learns the idea of geniza from Rav Chisda. Mid Rav Chisda amar Rav, from that which Rav Chisda said that Rav said. The Amar Rav Chisda amar Rav, because Rav Chisda said that Rav said, Minayin la'avodas kocham shel Yisrael shatun geniza. From where do we know that the avodah zarah of a Jew, it requires burial? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, lo sita lecha asherah kol eitzel mizbach. It says that you can't plant an asherah by the mizbeach. Ma mizbeach ton geniza. So we say just like the mizbeach requires geniza, needs to be buried. It's aser b'hanor. Rashi says af asherah tu'una geniza. So to the asherah Asherah needs to be buried. V'idach, in the other Tana, Hahumi Boile L'chid Reish Lakish, he uses that pasuk of Losita Alecha Asherah Kol Eitz Eitzel Mizbach. He uses it for the teaching of Reish Lakish, the Yom Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish says, Kol Hamayim Dayan She'enu Hagan, anybody who sets up a judge that's not a proper judge, Ki'ilu Noteya Asherah B'Yisrael, it's like planting an Asherah tree in Klal Yisrael. Shenemar, like, because it says in the pasuk, Shoftim V'Shotrim Titen L'cha B'Chol Sharecha, talks about setting up judges. V'Samachlei, and right near there it says, Losita L'cha Asherah Kol Eitz, you can't plant an Asherah tree, so you understand that if it's a bad judge, it's like an Asherah. And Amar Rav Ashi says, Uvemakam Talmidei Chachamim Kilu Nato Eitzel Mizbeach. If the person sets up a bad judge in a place of Talmidei Chachamim, it's like planting that Asherah tree right by the Mizbeach. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Eitzel Mizbach. Again, it says by the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rav Hamnuna asks the following question, Risech Kli La'avodas Kochavim, if somebody welds together a vessel for Avodah Zarah, for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, Mahu, what's the halacha in that situation? When does it become prohibited? And the Gemara clarifies, Avodas Kochavim Deman. Now, whose Avodah Zarah are we talking about? Ilema Avodas Kochavim de Oved Kochavim. If we're going to say the Avodah Zarah that belongs to an Oved Kochavim, it belongs to an idol worshiper, to a non-Jew. So, Bein Rabbi Yishmael uvein Rabbi Akiva, whether we're following Rabbi Yishmael or Rabbi Akiva, we'll see Rashi in a moment on this. Mesham she Avodas Kochavim hein. That's considered to be something that is used for Avodah Zarah. Umesham she Avodas Kochavim ein asur not sheyavdu. And the halach is that something used for Avodah Zarah is only asur when it becomes worshipped. V'yela, rather you'll say, Avodas Kochavim de Yisrael, we're talking here that it's an Avodah Zarah of a Jew. So we're talking about the vessel is being put together for the Avodah Zarah of a Jew. But the Gemara asks, Aliba Deman, now which Tana are we following in this question? Ilema Aliba de Rabbi Akiva. If we're following Rabbi Akiva, Hashta hi gufa lo mitzrat shetayav. Rabbi Akiva holds that by the Avodah Zarah of a Jew, it's not prohibited until it's actually worshipped. But that's by the Avodah Zarah itself. So Masham Shemi Boy, so something that's used for the Avodah Zarah, do we even need to ask it? Of course it has to be, of course it's only going to be prohibited when it's actually worshipped, when it's actually used. So the Gemara continues, Vela aliva de Rabbi Yishmael. Rather, the question here of Rav Hamnuna is according to Rabbi Yishmael. The Yamar Asura Miyad, because Rabbi Yishmael says the Avodah Zarah of a Jew is Asur Miyad, it's Asur right away. So the question is over here, what if you have something that's used for the Avodah Zarah? Mishamshin mi mishamshin gamrinan, do we learn things that are used from things that are used? Meaning, do we learn from things that are used by the Avodah Zarah of a non-Jew? Mahosam ad sheyavdu, just like over there, it's only when it's worshipped that it's actually Asur. Afhoch ad sheyavdu, so too over here, only when it's actually used. O dilma, or maybe minogamar, we learn from within the same context of Avodas Kochavim of Yisrael, from the Avodas Kochavim itself. Mahi Asura Miyad, just like the Avodah Zarah of Yisrael is Asur immediately, Af Meshamsheh Asur Miyad, so too that which is used for the Avodah Zarah is going to be Asur right away. And the Gemara continues and asks, "My irya de kami boile risech kli." Why is it that we're asking the question when you weld a kli together? Ti boile also, the question could be the same exact question if you make a kli for the Avodah Zarah. And we'll take a look at Rashi. Risech kli, again, somebody welds together a vessel. Klisha nishbar, we're talking here about a vessel that broke. V'hika shalav bekornis ad sheriko v'nispashet v'nismali pigimoso. You used a hammer in order to fix whatever was blemished, whatever was damaged. Bein Rabbi Yishmael, whether you're going to, according to Rabbi Yishmael or Rabbi Akiva, misham she'avodas kochavim shalovad kochavim ein asur nad sheyavdu. They both hold that if it belongs to an ovad kochavim, it's only asur when it's actually worshipped. Kida amran la'el, like we said earlier, haviyam v'lo nishtamshu behen. Yachol yu asur, and if it hasn't been used, one might think it's asur. Talmid lomar asher avdu. Rabbi Akiva ba'avodas kochavim atzma polig, and Rashi notes Rabbi Akiva argues on Rabbi Yishmael in terms of the avodah zarah itself. Avol b'kelim lo polig, but when it comes to kelim, when it comes to vessels, there is no argument. He does not argue, and so therefore, again, if we're talking about the avodas kochavim of an ovad kochavim, if that's the case over here, so certainly it's going to be only when it's worshipped. Mishamshin di Yisrael mi mishamshe avodas kochavim. So then the Gemara said, well, the question is, do we learn the mishamshin, that which is used for the avodah zarah of a Jew, from that which is used of the avodah zarah of a non-Jew? The avodas kochavim, the ovad kochavim, again, the avodah zarah of a non-Jew. Gamar, do we learn it out that way? V'lo mitzarat sheyishtamshu behen la'avodas kochavim, in which case it would only be asur when it's actually used, or no? Do we say that we just learn it out from the context of this particular situation itself, meaning avodas kochavim di Yisrael, just like the avodah zarah of Yisrael is asur immediately according to Rabbi Yishmael, maybe the mishamshin as well. And finally, the Gemara asked also, why did we talk about welding it together? Just making it could have been the same question. So kulo la'avodah mitchila, if it was all made for avodah zarah in the first place, we could have asked the same question. And the Gemara continues and revises the question of Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna mishum tumah yeshana kami boile. Rav Hamnuna actually was asking a question about old tumah. That's why he was talking about putting the kli back together again. As we learned in a Mishnah, kli matchus pshutein and mekavlein tamein. When it comes to metal vessels, it doesn't matter if they're straight metal vessels or if they have a receptacle, they are tamei. Nishtabru, and if they break, tiaro, so then they become pure. Chazar v'ason kelim, if they're then again made into vessels, yachzru l'tumah yeshana, so the old tumah returns. And so v'hachi kami boile, so this was the question of Rav Hamnuna as follows. Ki hadra tumah, when we say that the tumah comes back, hani mili l'tumah doraisa, maybe that's only true by tumah v'doraisa level. Avol tumah d'rabbanan lo, but when we're talking about tumah d'rabbanan, maybe not. Odil maloshnor, maybe it doesn't make a difference. And the Gemara questions this, v'ti boile shar tumas d'rabbanan. Well, if his question is about tumah d'rabbanan, he should just ask in general about tumah d'rabbanan. Why is he picking on the tumah by avodah zarah? And the Gemara says to that, chada migo chada kami boile. It's one question within another, meaning tumah d'rabbanan mihadra lo hadra. The first question is, does tumah d'rabbanan, does that return or not? And imtim salomar lo hadra, if you're going to say that it does not return, tumah d'avodas kochavim, maybe by the tumah of avodah zarah, misham chumra d'avodas kochavim, because it has a certain stringency, because it's avodah zarah, mishav y'rabbanan ketumah doraisa o lo, do the rabbanan consider tumah of avodah zarah like tumah doraisa or not? And the Gemara says to that, take with the Gemara leaves that as a question. And Rashi explains, Chazr l'tumas and Yeshana, again, they get back their old tumah, tzricha tvila, they need to be immersed. Of Yetzias HaShabbos and Mesech HaShabbos, Mefarish Taima. The Gemara over there explains the reason why it needs tvila, Gezeira Shema Yomru tvila Bas Yuma Ola, because it's a decree. Maybe people are going to think tvila of one day is effective. V'kami boy klish nishtamshu bo la'avodas kochavim. So now the question over here is, what if it was a vessel for avodah zarah? V'amrinu b'Mesech HaShabbos, b'Perek Amar Rabbi Kiva, we say Mesech HaShabbos, Meshamsheh, Tamein, Shavran, Kidei Lataron, V'chazar, V'rizchon, La'avodas Kochavim, V'adayin lo nishtamshu bo, Mihader, L'tumah kamaiso lav. Again, the question is, does the tumah over here return or not? Mi'amrinan hani mili d'chozron, L'tumas and Yeshana doraisa, maybe that's only by tumah doraisa. Avol tumas avodas kochavim d'rabbanan hi, Ukroy asmachta b'yalma, maybe the tumah of avodah zarah is d'rabbanan, and the psukim that we bring for that are really just an asmachta. They're just a hint of the idea, but it's only d'rabbanan. And shar tumas d'rabbanan, what about by other tumah d'rabbanan? Kagon, kli d'metama m'mashkin. You can have a vessel that became tummy with liquids. The midoraisa lo metama mashkin kli. On a doraisa level, liquids are not metame a vessel. For rabbanan gozer misham mashkezav, v'zav kagon roku, meme raglov. The avatumah ninu, the rabbanan just make a gzeira because there are certain kinds of liquids that are able to convey tumah, like by the mashk of a zav or zava, like meaning the spit of a zav or zava, or the urine. That's an avatumah. Umetamu kli, and they are able to make a kli tame. And so then the Gemara said, chada migo chada, klamar b'shar tumas nami mi boile. It really was a question by other tumah d'rabbanan. V'hai denakar avodas kochavim, and the reason why we're talking about avodas kochavim sheila acheres yaneshalos mitoch pashto shel rishon, we're asking a secondary question if you're going to answer the first question a certain way. Im tim salomar v'shar tumas d'rabbanan lo hadri hachamai. If you're going to say by other tumah d'rabbanan doesn't return, what would be the halacha over here? And the Gemara continues, boy minei Rabbi Yochanan may Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Yanai the following question: Tikroves avodas kochavim shel ochlim. Let's say you have an offering to avodah zarah of food. Mahu, what's the halacha over there? Mimahanyalu bittul taharinu mituma. Let's say there's bittul done, there's nullification done. Does that help to purify it of any tumah, of any impurity? Although or no, do we say that bittul does not help when it comes to the tumah of ochlim that are used for avodah zarah, that are used for offerings to avodah zarah? And the Gemara continues, V'ti boile kalim. Why not ask the same exact question by kalim? You can say by kalim as well. If they were used for avodah zarah, do we say that there's this concept of bittul, that the tumah goes away? And the Gemara says to that, kalim lo kami boile. He didn't have a question by vessels. Kevan de islu tahara b'mikvah. Since there's a concept by vessels of purification in a mikvah, so tumanami botla, the tumah also can be botla, it can be nullified. Ki kami boile ochlim. The whole question is just by food. The Gemara says, V'ti boile avodas kochavim gufa. Why not ask the same question by the avodah zarah itself? And to that the Gemara says, avodas kocham gufa lomi boile. He didn't have a question by the avodah zarah. And Rashi explains, tikroves avodas kocham shel ochlin ma'u misolka tumah minayu al yedei bittul lo. Does nullification work to take away that tumah of avodah zarah from them or not? V'ti boilach kelim. Why not ask the same question by vessels shenishtamshu b'hen la'avodas kochavim, vessels that are used for avodah zarah, isalka tumah minayu ke'echad isalka isura. Just like we know there's a concept of bittul that the prohibition can be taken away. What about tumah? Does that go away? And Rashi continues, when it comes to Kalim, Kavan de Islu Tara, since there's a purification, Kishar Tumas b'mikvah, like we find other kinds of Tumas that there's a purification in the mikvah, Hacha de mikvah di day hainu bittel, here where the mikvah is bittel, it is nullification, Kavan de Isura batal minayu, Tumavade nami salka, once the Isra goes away, once the prohibition goes away, so certainly the Tumah will go away through bittel as well. Ki kami boilan ochlan de leslu tahara, Kishar Tumas b'mikvah. The question is by food, which there is no concept at all of purification in a mikvah. Why not ask about avodah zara shalochlan? Let's say you have avodah zara of food. Ask about that instead of asking about offerings of avodah zara of food. Ask about avodah zara of food. For example, someone bows to the bread. You could have the same question: does the tumah go away through nullification or not? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis.